You are listening to the Metro South Morning Show on the new WXBR 1460.
.837 here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. You were listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. Peter Zimbor and Mike Pava here with you on this Monday morning. Remember, you can follow along with us on Twitter at PM in the AM Boston. Like us on Facebook, PM in the AM, the Metro South Morning Show. And the best place to hear archived interviews and segments from the show is on our official YouTube channel at youtube.com/PM in the AM Boston. Mike, here during the month of December, we are bringing back a lot of our favorite guests over the past calendar year. I could say calendar year, but we haven't even been on a full calendar year yet. Over the past 10 months or so since we've been on, both in studio and over the phone. And today is one of those days we bring back one of our frequent contributors to this program, someone who we're very fond of here, someone who has a history here on the frequency of AM 1460. It's Miss Betsy Clague, formerly Betsy Zulis, newswoman here at 1460 during the WBET days, and now a lawyer. Betsy, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for asking me back. I loved walking in this morning, once I survived the walk-in, and seeing the old reel-to-reel, one of the old boat anchors, as Steve Mason used to call them, that we used to use at WBET. It was so much fun to see that. You've got a little museum that you're starting.
Exactly what it is. It's a museum.
Wonderful. Broadcast museum. You know, Bill Hogan downtown at Hoagie's Hobbies has started, it is early in the morning, isn't it? Has started a museum of local history. And it's like growing by leaps and bounds. It used to be this little section inside his store with some old photographs, but it gets bigger every time I walk into the place, which I do pretty frequently because my office is right upstairs.
How often do people bring us stuff that's just interesting of local note? Oh, here's a picture of JFK when he was in Brockton in the 60s. Here's this, here's that, here's this picture, here's that. You know who this is in this picture? It happens a few times a week.
Well, that just shows how hungry the community was for you folks to get on the air and to remain local. And I know there's so much happiness that you've done that.
Yeah, well, despite the impending prognostications of doom from day one, we're still here, right?
That's right.
Those were pretty public, I must say. But not to get into inside baseball, but it was pretty amazing how much people felt that they were certain that there'd be none of us would recognize what we were listening to. And in fact, here you are, and it's better than it's been in a long time, I think.
Well, we thank you so much for your kind words. Once again, we're chatting with Betsy Clague here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in the interim from when you left AM 1460 as a newswoman and from when you, say, started appearing on our show regularly, appearances of you on the radio were few and far between. Do you like getting back behind the microphone here and there in the morning?
You bring up an interesting point. I'm quite surprised at the what I consider the sudden interest. I'd been interviewed. Actually, I'd been interviewed on CNN. I'd been done some television and radio.
Look at her dropping the big guns.
From time to time, but only because of a big case that I had, for instance. So if it was profiled in the Globe, I think in nearly 18 years of practice, I've had one press conference in my office, and everybody showed up. But other than that, that's right. I've certainly. As expected in this business, when I went off the air, I went off the air, and it was time for other people. WBET, WCAV, as you may know, wasn't the last place that I worked in the business, but it was, once I was off the air, I was pretty much involved in the dual challenges of starting and growing a business and, more importantly, raising my son.
A lot of people have asked me and Mike this over the past week, so I guess it's only natural we'll throw this over to you. And I say the past week, but really the past 2-3 weeks. Were you sad to see 60 Main get bulldozed a little bit in some of the old studios that will be renovated soon, getting the construction deal going on over the weeks?
Well,
the old Enterprise building is what I'm referring to, by the way.
The 60 Main Street, the sadness that I had about 60 Main Street is something that I had felt a long time ago, because it was nothing like what it had been when the people who were the pioneers in creating this heritage station were working there.
You're saying it deteriorated from what it was to
a
shell of its former self almost.
So it was hard to be sorry to see it go, really. It is so disappointing that there wasn't enough of an interest to keep a local major news, journalism, broadcast organization on Main Street, whereas in the past, there was the Brockton Times across the street from that location, and then the Enterprise Building. And so it's hard for those of us who are aware of that history and maybe even were a little bit of a part of that history to see no broadcast or journalistic presence on Main Street. That's a little hard.
And there's no AM 1460 in Main Street, no Enterprise. If you go to North Main Street, not broadcast, but there is the community access TV station.
That's true. Thankfully, that's true. That's true. But even, seeing 4 Main Street, which was actually built by Continental Cablevision, not only for their local cable, but it had the local programming department that did live nightly television programming and lots of other programming because, as you certainly know, Continental Cablevision was required to provide about $600,000 a year toward a local programming department, and that was something that disappeared over the years. But that was part of their license commitment with the city. So they funded a local, and it was enough to fund a small local programming department that was started by a couple of people who were professionals who were able to actually teach the rest of us how you do TV.
And you were a part of that along with Charlie Bergeron. Correct me if I'm wrong, Linda Balzotti, I believe, was on the
Yes,
Continental
that's right.
Cablevision.
That's right. At that time, that department was set up in 1982, 1983, perhaps before that, but around that time. And I joined them as an intern in January of 1984, and then 2 weeks before I graduated from college, I was given a full-time position there. So,
once again, we're chatting with Betsy Clague here on AM 1460, the new WXBR, former newswoman here on the AM 1460 frequency, now a local lawyer. As is the case when you come in here, we want to talk to you about some legal stuff, amongst many other things, as we can chat about a profusion of subjects, as Mike would say, this morning here on AM 1460.
I stole that word from you.
I take full credit for it.
It's so nice of you to admit that.
I really did.
If we're going to be talking about a whole lot of different things, I would like to take the opportunity to wish the best of luck to my niece, Melina Zulis, who is Rock Star of the Week at her school in Milton this week.
Really?
She's 5 years old, and she is a rock star this week. So it's only fitting that we mention her on the radio. Certainly we've got some listeners out in Milton.
Is that an actual award, Rock Star of the Week?
Yeah.
This is Student of the Month. I'd rather be Rock Star of the Week when I was
No
a kid.
kidding. Isn't that so cool? I mean, she's such a talented youngster, so it's not at all surprising to me. But
My child was Rock Star of the Week.
Can you see the bumper
So
sticker
much
now?
better, yeah.
Absolutely.
With a picture of Melina playing guitar or something. That would be cool.
Rocking out.
Young Melina, we congratulate you. You are the Rock Star of the Week. Betsy Clague here in studio. Betsy, over the past 10 months or so doing the morning program, it seems like maybe we just weren't paying attention when we weren't on the air, but there seems to be a lot more high-profile legal cases going on. The first high-profile criminal activity that me and Mike saw here on the station was the morning where the manhunt took place for the Tsarnaev brothers in Watertown. Big article coming out in the Boston Globe yesterday about the background about the Tsarnaev brothers prior to the Boston Marathon bombings taking place. What is the latest in relation to Tamerlan Tsarnaev, who will be going to trial at some point in 2014, to your knowledge?
Well, there has been an effort to ease the restrictions under which he's being held. And of course, this is kind of an ongoing theme in that case. You'll recall at the time that he was arrested, there was talk about him being interviewed and questioned without being Mirandized, without being read his Miranda rights by investigators. And at that time, we talked about the fact that there certainly are opportunities built into the federal law that allow for investigators to question somebody about continuing threats to which they may be a part, or at least that's the justification for it. And it certainly is an important justification. And we talked also about the fact that even if the questioning was wide-ranging enough to cause him to furnish evidence against himself, which the Constitution prohibits him from being forced to do, the fact is the remedy for that is that certain evidence would be thrown out. So at the time we were talking about the fact that prosecutors can figure out how strong their case is and what parts or pieces of evidence that might come from him or might be affected by him making a statement about it without having been read his rights could be sacrificed from the case. So fast forward a little bit now, he's held under extremely secure conditions, and his lawyers are pretty consistently and frequently in court. I wouldn't say frequently, but pretty consistently in court trying to ease some of those restrictions. And what I'm not sure of yet, and maybe you can help me because sometimes I have been living under a cave, has there been a determination from the United States Attorney General, Eric Holder, whether he will recommend the death penalty?
To my knowledge, there has not been.
All right. So I think that's the thing that people are watching and waiting about primarily. I didn't see the article yet in the Sunday Globe. I was out of state, so I haven't had a chance to look at the Sunday paper. But there is a lot, when there's not a whole lot happening publicly, the speculation seems to increase about these cases that capture our attention, deservedly so in that case.
Now, when the Tamerlan Tsarnaev and his brother, who passed away during that whole manhunt in Watertown and surrounding areas, when that first came to be, a lot of people said that whoever ends up representing either of these brothers in court, best case scenario for them is that they keep him alive. That's still the case in your mind?
I think so. Yes. He's not coming out of prison.
That was the first big legal case which we followed here on the Metro South Morning Show, PM and the AM. The other one, which came about shortly thereafter the Boston Marathon bombings, which was just one wild day to be here in the morning with this manhunt on the air. We did about 3 hours straight on the Tsarnaev brothers, just watching TV, almost giving a play-by-play commentary of what we're witnessing on TV, because you don't want to make light of this, but it almost seemed like a Batman movie. You could not believe what you were witnessing was actually real. Shortly thereafter, the Aaron Hernandez situation came about, where Aaron Hernandez, former Patriots tight end at this point, was linked to a murder and ultimately arrested and charged with first-degree murder. At the time, the feel, I think, amongst the media was this is a slam-dunk, cut-and-dry case. They've got the book on Aaron Hernandez, and they're going to throw it at him. Now it seems that all these months later, you hear little trickles in the media come in of, he's going to get off. The case isn't as strong as it may seem. What's your thoughts?
I think that is something that good counsel can strategically place. Well, not just any good lawyer. You really have to have a feel for what the hunger is of the media. The media as it is now, where, it used to be there was the news media, and that was kind of the lead of the media. Now the media is not led by news anymore. It's more led by entertainment. So there's a whole different, I think, approach that people who are savvy need to understand that they need to make. And I think that counsel for Aaron Hernandez and his supporters has been strategic and clever about that in terms of making sure that information trickles out. I know that his girlfriend has been indicted for lying to investigators, which in and of itself is interesting. I have, by the way, never heard of anybody now, and again, it's just me, but I've never heard of anybody actually ultimately convicted and serving a prison term for that charge of lying to investigators. So instead of maintaining her right to remain silent, she said something, and they said, that's a lie. Your claim not to remember something is a lie. I'm not sure how they're going to prove that, but in any event, they were able to get they now have charged her with lying to investigators. So if you maintain your right to remain silent, that's one thing. But if you're persuaded to say something that's not true, you face criminal charges.
Last time you were here, I asked you about the manner in which Aaron Hernandez was arrested because it seemed theatrical to some degree. They went to his house, knocked on the door. He opened the door, shirt off, not wearing much clothing, and they handcuffed him, and that was that. He was arrested. Whereas it seemed like with people of a high profile like Aaron Hernandez in the past, they gave him the opportunity to turn themselves in things of that nature. We talked about the interesting way in which that went about. I want to ask you about this. The Patriots played the Miami Dolphins just yesterday. The Patriots lost.
And lost.
They lost. They didn't pull it off in the last 2 minutes like they normally do, but they lost. Last time the Patriots played the Dolphins prior to yesterday's game, we're going maybe a month ago at Gillette Stadium in Foxborough. Game's over. Miami Dolphins team is getting ready to get on the team bus, and a member of the Miami Dolphins who had been a friend of Aaron Hernandez was served papers that he had to appear in court by the Massachusetts State Police. Tell me about the procedure there. I'm sure that scared the living hell out of him as he's just trying to leave the field for a football game.
Routinely, prosecutors use police officers and state police troopers to serve subpoenas, summonses for testimony, whether it be subpoenas to testify before a grand jury or subpoenas to testify at actual hearings, criminal proceedings, and even trials. It is daunting, and it is something that everybody who is licensed to practice within the Commonwealth has subpoena power. So we can all hire process servers and have people served with papers in order to appear and testify in proceedings. But it's something that has got to be done carefully, judiciously, and not be done just to intimidate and harass. And there are actually rules about the extent to which you can be sanctioned for that. But having said that, I know I have seen lots of government agencies, prosecutors, offices of the Attorney General, even offices that have kind of a lesser subpoena power, use that power to create a mood, if you will. And so I think there's some of that contributes to it. But it is routine for prosecutors and government authorities that have subpoena power to use police officers and troopers to serve those subpoenas.
You mentioned create a mood, and it seems like in the Aaron Hernandez case, prosecutors and those involved in the legal system within the district where Aaron Hernandez is currently being held captive in jail, they want to portray somewhat of a tough guy, no-nonsense image.
I think that's right. And whenever you see people being charged with lying to investigators, you see that kind of thing. Because when investigators question individuals, they are required to inform them of whatever rights they have within the context of that questioning. But that doesn't mean that the questioning is not as forceful as the law permits. And so that means that while, obviously the Constitution forbids it being accompanied with torture, and forbids serious coercion, manipulation, and a little bit of intimidation, that's a different thing. There is definitely a line. There's a continuum. And investigators use all the tools that are available to him. And in Massachusetts, the law is pretty measured about limiting what investigators can do when they are questioning witnesses, even defendant witnesses. It's not cut and dried that they can't be mean. They can't put people in situations where they are in physical pain or stress, but there's a lot that they can do to extract information from people. And intimidation, if it doesn't rise to the level of coercion, is something that's used fairly frequently.
You mentioned that entertainment is at the forefront of media now as opposed to news. I find it interesting that a lot of the most unique information about this Aaron Hernandez case has come courtesy of TMZ, an entertainment website, as opposed to, say, major cable news outlets.
See what I mean?
Precisely what you were referring to. And I mentioned moments ago that I've seen a little bit of a change in the way the media has approached this case in terms of their coverage
Right.
in terms of their editorial that maybe Aaron Hernandez is going to get off. Is it too early to say because it hasn't even gone to trial, or is that fair?
I think it is too early to say, but all I think it indicates is that that defense counsel have been clever about getting snippets of their side of the story to become part of the public narrative.
Well, we're chatting with Betsy Clague here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Betsy, you're going to hang around for another segment, right?
Oh, my goodness, is this segment over? Sure, I'm happy to. Just one more point to make about the Hernandez thing. There's something called momentum in cases, in all cases, and it is not at all uncommon in any kind of a circumstance to see things kind of, weighted one way, then weighted the other way, at least in their appearance, as a case progresses. My gosh, we even saw that in a case that probably now people acknowledge as a slam dunk, and that's the Keith Luke case that we talked about earlier. But you'll recall times when we were thinking, gee, this is his side of the story, and this seems to have some traction, right?
The Keith Luke story actually may have been the first legal case that we covered really intently here on PM and the AM prior to the Tsarnaev brothers and prior to Hernandez, because that one happened literally right in the vicinity of where we're located in Brockton.
That's right.
You're listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. We're going to step aside for a quick local news update. When we return, more in studio with Betsy Clague. Stay with us here on WXBR.
You are listening to the Metro South Morning Show on the new WXBR 1460.
AM 1460, the new WXBR. We're back here on the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. Peter Zimbo and Mike Pava still here with you on this Monday morning. Not a bad way to kick off the week thus far, Mike.
Not bad at all.
Makes the show go by quicker when we have in-studio guests on a Monday. Sometimes you trickle into work on a Monday. You have guests, it just makes everything that much more fun.
I agree.
Joining us in studio once again is Betsy Clague, local lawyer, former news personality here at AM 1460. Betsy, we talked in the first segment with you about the Tsarnaev brothers. We talked about Keith Luke. We talked about Aaron Hernandez. One name which, oddly enough, has not come into this conversation just yet, Whitey Bulger. Since we last spoke to you, Whitey Bulger has been convicted.
Well, and remember what one of the things that we said at the time, and I think in that moment we were talking about the Luke case, but it really does apply to notorious villains of all kind, and that is they go away, they disappear, and they're not heard from again. And for some of them, that's the worst punishment imaginable. Whitey Bulger does not hold the stage. His little outbursts that we pretty much predicted in our conversation in June, and Judge Casper's handling of those, I think we predicted as well, are no more. They're not dominating the headlines. The world is moved on to something else, while he gets shuffled off in his leg irons to other facilities to be classified. So it's this kind of, anonymous, miserable, bureaucratic existence that every other inmate goes through. He's a number.
There were rumors that he was going to take the stand at one point, and while it was not unexpected that we did not hear from him, a bit disappointing. I think a lot of people wanted to hear what he had to say.
Well, and for somebody who is facing such persuasive evidence against them, it's often the last refuge of defense counsel to say he's going to take the witness stand and he'll be exonerated. I've heard that so many times, only to have people not take the stand. And really, his lawyers, Jay Carney, had been very persuasive and convinced even veteran journalists who had covered plenty of things like this that, oh yeah, he's going to take the stand. And so you had people writing about, speculating, who should have known better, really, speculating about what it was going to be like to have Whitey Bulger on the stand, only to be disappointed when he didn't take the stand, and then act like it was a surprise. There's nothing surprising about that.
Wasn't the writing on the wall for Whitey Bulger to begin with? I mean, you knew he was going away, and there was a thought maybe he just wants to get his side out there before we get sent away.
Well, I think Yeah, I mean, I think that that's part of it, but he didn't do that, of course, and that's why he ended up calling it a kangaroo court because, he wanted to save some face about his about the decision ultimately not to testify.
Once again, we're chatting with Betsy Clague here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. I almost said Zulus for like the third time this morning.
Whatever you want to call me.
We're going with Clague.
Both of those work, so I answer to both.
Since you started coming on our show more often, do people re-recognize you who you haven't heard from in many years?
I have heard response like that. It's been it's fun. It's fun. Here and elsewhere, it's been interesting, like I said, to have there be any interest at all in what my opinion is. I don't spend a lot of time sharing it unless people ask.
Who was the news person after you left WBET back in the day? I'm trying to do the timeline here. Because when I first came into WBET, it was Steve Winslow.
There was Steve Winslow. And prior to that, and the failure of my memory is only about me. It's not about the person, because this is a long time ago now. This was more than 15 years ago. But there was a woman named Martha, who was an accountant by day, who did a terrific job with Charlie. I think that was her name. And I'm so sorry I don't,
Don't feel bad. There's one
memory.
guy that Ron Van Dam completely forgets ever existing, but me and Mike recall that he was the news guy for a couple of years. Right, Mike?
Yeah.
Adam Cashel did exist.
Yeah.
Adam Cashel did exist. Ron Van Dam has no recollection of him ever existing. He was between Steve Winslow and Tom Rafferty.
That's right.
The Raff. Got to find that guy one of these days.
I didn't know any of those folks because, remember, I was still in the business for a little while after I left WBET. I went to WPRO in Providence and would probably have stayed there longer. It's just that the law practice, which at the time was part-time, got much busier.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a few former AM 1460 news folks who found their way in the Providence media. You weren't the only one.
Oh, my goodness, no. There was precedent for that. In the past, the great broadcaster Larry Giorgi had been at WBET and then became a real fixture in the Providence market. I think spent the rest of his career there. I had gone to the Providence market twice, once in television, working for Channel 12 way back in 1988, and then again nearly 10 years later after I left WBET.
So you like working at PRI? Do you like radio better?
I ended up in radio because I did prefer radio. There were more opportunities there, and there was more of the original. He had more of an opportunity to do original news gathering there. Although I have to say, when I worked in television in Providence, that was the part of the operation that I worked in. But there were so many other aspects to it.
Now, one thing that was, kind of the bread and butter of AM 1460 back in the day, which we brought back here to the AM 1460 frequency, was the coverage of the most recent local election. You really don't get coverage of local elections, say Brockton and surrounding towns, like you would hear at AM 1460 on any other media outlet in the area, whether it be the Boston news stations or the newspapers or things like that. You obviously still pay very close attention to what's happening in local politics.
I do. I wouldn't say very close, but somewhat close. Sure. I have, it's funny. I certainly not as close as I did when I covered it. When I covered it, I didn't have the personal interest in it that I do now. But when I covered it, it was a requirement because it was clear to us that was what the audience wanted, to go to school committee meetings, to go to FinCom meetings, to go to city council meetings. And
FinCom meetings, by the way, are just downright exciting, folks.
They're not, but if you know what's coming up on the agenda, you do want to see that. And some of this was, we didn't really have the opportunity to watch any feeds of the local cable coverage, although I suppose that we could have. But we did have the opportunity to ask direct questions and talk face-to-face to the players and the participants. So, for example, this most recent bizarreness in the city council meeting where it took 19 votes to set the tax rate, I watched that. I happened to see that, and I couldn't believe it. And it was the one time I would have loved to have been there with a tape recorder and gone to most of them, all of them, and say, what were you thinking and what was the holdup? And by the way, were these private conversations done, in violation of the open meeting law? Because were decisions made and discussions about votes taking place during these recesses when you're having these conversations? I think it was a very frustrating time for the council, so I don't mean to pick on them, but it was bizarre.
We took the time and effort to talk with both mayoral candidates during the general election, all of the city council at large candidates, and we had, I think, everybody involved in every contested election in the city of Brockton in the studio at some point, whether it be for interviews or for debates of things of that nature. So people were listening and people were caring. It's
so important, and I hope that the local coverage only increases rather than decreases, even as the election season is over now and into, the issues that are of most importance that are going to be debated and discussed, and the policy matters that are so important to the lives. It's interesting. The reason local politics and local political coverage is so successful to local radio and really to local media is because people have started to understand that is where the decisions that have the greatest impact on their lives are made. Those decisions are not made in Congress, thankfully, because this Congress has done less than any Congress in our history. But those decisions
not only do the two sides not get along, but there's divisions within each side.
Right. And that's always been the case, but to be brought to a standstill is, borders on treason, I think.
I also think their approval rating is in the single digits.
It has been for quite some time, consistently. And that brings everybody down. But the decisions that have the most impact on our lives, and people have started to realize this. My generation has started to realize this. When I was covering it in my late 20s and early 30s, it wasn't cool, and everybody was out making money. But then they come back, and it's like, oh, yeah, I think, school committee is really important. Being a selectman is really important. The local finance committee, hugely important. And the city council or board of selectmen or town meeting are of huge significance. So it's easy for me to sit back and be self-satisfied about the detail with which, I covered them for radio stations that I worked with and television organizations that I worked for at the time, because now, people have discovered the importance of this stuff.
Your thoughts on how everything went down and the results of the general election, which took place in November, and the results of which will come into effect in the next few weeks in early January?
Well, we do have an ambivalent electorate, to say the least, in this community. That came through not only in the results of the mayoral race, decided by 55 votes, meaning if, as somebody pointed out to me, if 26 people had voted differently, Mayor Balzotti would have had a third term. So, she captured 4 out of 7 wards. A lot of people have said that it was a surprise that she only captured Ward 4, the ward that she had been a city council of, by approximately 300 votes. So I think that there are real divisions in the community about the direction in which we should go, and we saw that in a whole lot of other races too. There are a lot of close races. Those of us who follow politics would have loved to have seen more people vote at the same time. You got to be happy with the fact that elections now affect every every bit of the community, every individual community within the community in a way that wasn't the case as much when I was covering them.
Mike and myself made this observation on the air in the day following the general election. It seemed to us that a lot of new voters came out to vote in support for Bill Carpenter, whereas Linda Balzotti did have a base of people who have supported her over the past decade plus in her time in politics as both a councilwoman and mayor here in Brockton.
I don't know that I agree with that, because I think the Balzotti administration had done the best job reaching out to new voters, minority communities of any administration in history. And so I saw a real division in the minority communities. A lot of them supported the administration, and a lot of them also supported the challenger. And it'll be interesting to see if folks are pleased with the direction in which their vote went. Obviously there's stuff going on with the transition that has resulted in all kinds of speculation, not much coverage, not many statements, but so it'll be interesting to see how the new team handles the business of governing. Mayor Balzani was very much involved with the day-to-day. If there was a snowstorm, if there was anything the government was supposed to be doing, whether or not she was good at tooting her own horn about it, she was out there doing it. And that was very well recognized within the school department. I know that since the election, there was some suggestion that she hadn't been out and he's been out and where has she been? But I had been to three large school department functions and she was there for all of them and a keynote speaker for one and spoke at all of them, and the Veterans Day celebration at City Hall was bigger and better than ever. So I'm not sure where people get that sense.
Once again, we're chatting with Betsy Clague here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. It was exciting to see a mayoral race that was actually contested and competitive as we're covering it here at WXBR, because the last election I covered was an absolute slam dunk win that it wasn't even so much an election.
Well, and I have to say, I've covered so many and seen so many close and competitive elections that.
But there are some perennial candidates.
Yes, without a doubt. That's true. I have to give Ron Matter credit for running and for, even though he's been somebody that's received a lot of criticism, it became clear to me toward the end of his campaign where he was, and because there were so many promises, wild promises made by several candidates during this election season, and some of us are kind of sitting back saying, okay, off you go, let's see how you do. Ron Matter was somebody who said, for instance, specifically, I'm going to get rid of John Condon, the chief financial officer and everybody's local favorite punching bag, right? But if you read the Department of Revenue's audit, it's like an audit of the city's finances and financial circumstances, and it's based in part on the results of the KPMG audit that's done every year. And this is the stuff that can make you go to sleep. But the fact is, it comes out, it's a public document. It became clear to me when I read that document that Ron Matter had read it too, because the Department of Revenue, the state, which forced the city to hire a CFO to begin with, and handed the city John Condon's resume and said, this is the guy you need, 21 years ago or so. They still, in this year's document, certifying the city's financial health, said, John Condon is so important to the financial stability of the city that, in fact, he's going to be retiring at some point, and the city's going to have to find a way to hand off the position to somebody else competent to keep the financial stability of the city in place. And those of us remembering the vastly unstable days, the time when the city was under the control of a finance control board, the time when there were teacher strikes, understand what the DOR is talking about.
Which is illegal, yet it happened.
And, well, all strikes are illegal involving public employee unions. Having said that, the DOR said there has to be some kind of succession method. Ron Matter, it became clear to me that he actually read that report, not because he cited to it, but because he then said, and he had his own interpretation of the meaning of it, but then I saw late in his campaign that he changed his statement from, I'm going to get rid of John Condon, to, I'm going to develop a succession plan for John Condon. And when I first heard him say that, I thought, he's read something. He's read something, and instead of ignoring it, he's incorporating it into his thinking. There's been some evolution in the thinking of the mayor-elect, which, some people can criticize that and say, oh, he's not going to keep his promises. But other people will look at it and say, well, he is responding to conditions that he is now discovering more about.
There is a difference between flip-flopping and educating yourself and changing your mind, I think.
Well, the question is there? Why not have candidates educate themselves before they make all kinds of sweeping public statements about how they're going to eliminate crime and keep taxes low?
I meant that as a vague statement about all politicians, not one in particular, but I have seen that in my lifetime of following politics.
Sure.
Flip-flopper? No, he changed his mind over the course of 15 years. I think there's a difference.
It depends on who you talk to. But yes, but every candidate that does that is going to say, it's not a flip-flop, my position has evolved. I mean, we've seen that from the president on down.
We have seen that. We're chatting with Betsy Zulis here on AM 1460, the new WXBR, Betsy Clague. She's Betsy. We're chatting with Betsy, nevertheless, here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Betsy, obviously, folks can probably determine from what we've discussed that you still do live in the city of Brockton, a former Brockton High graduate. Would you ever consider running for political office locally? Or even beyond locally?
I'm not running for political office, and I have no plans to. No. No. I've got enough to do.
I've got enough to do as well, but it seems like people with as keen of an interest in this stuff as you do, at some point, give it a go.
Look, at the past couple of years, there's been an interest in my opinions about things locally and regionally. I don't know really where it's come from because there wasn't for years, but that doesn't mean I could get elected.
Means that there's interest, though.
But that doesn't mean I could get elected, and that's not why I wouldn't run. But I have an interest in the decisions that are made by and within government, but I'm not making those decisions.
And I think that we see this first right up front, is that the quality of people that run for local government positions in the area, while they're all well-intentioned good people, the quality of, I guess, shall we say, leadership is varied quite a bit.
That's true. That's true. Well, listen, people, there's a whole new ethic, and it's not one that that inspires me, really, but there's a whole new ethic in public life where people are drawn into public life because of what they think it can do for them, and because they think that, and because of exclusively their personal interactions with government. And that's not leadership. It's not leadership to be motivated entirely by your own personal relationship with government. The thing that I appreciated about Mayor Balzotti as a public servant is that her commitment to children, to the schools, to setting up I think the first ever local commission to deal with the opioid epidemic in this community, and to give attention to communities that were struggling, had nothing to do with her personal issues and had everything to do with her vision of leadership. You don't see a lot of that in public life, or you don't see enough of that in public life on the local level these days.
Betsy,
and I'm not sure you do, even on the national level.
Betsy, we've only got a few minutes left. Any final words for our listeners this morning? And we thank you so much for joining us, I think, for either the third or fourth time this year since we've been on the air. You might hold the record. Her and Newbie and Dave Wheeler, they're going to battle it out in a three-way fight today.
No need to battle it out with that. No, I want to thank you very much for inviting me in. It's a hoot.
Well, Betsy, we thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we hope to see you in 2014.
Thank you very much. I'm certainly going to be around, and I'll look forward to seeing you as well.
That's Betsy Clague, Betsy Zulis. It's Betsy joining us here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. We'll step aside for a local news update. Back with more of the program after this.